Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Monday, December 6th. This is Africa 54.
In Gambia, incumbent President Adama Barrow wins re-election by a comfortable margin. Pope Francis calls the migrant crisis a shipwreck of civilization. And travel uncertainty returns as the Omicron variant spreads.
Despite efforts by disgraced former President Yahya Jammeh to influence the vote, Gambia's incumbent President Adama Barrow has won re-election by a significant margin over his nearest challenger. Natalie Powell has more.
Thousands partied outside Gambia's presidential palace on Sunday night after incumbent President Adama Barrow won re-election. Saturday's vote was the first in 27 years without disgraced former President Yahya Jammeh, who fled to Equatorial Guinea after refusing to accept defeat to Barrow 5 years ago. Once cowed by Jammeh's omnipresent secret police, crowds thronged into the streets of the capital Banjul as results came in. This peaceful election was seen by some as a line drawn under Jammeh's more than 2 decades of despotic rule, period marred by killings and torture. Speaking to his supporters, Barrow said democracy had taken its course.
Having been the lucky person to be chosen by you, I sincerely assure you, each and every one of you, that I will do all I can and utilize every resource at my disposal to make the Gambia a better place for all.
Barrow's first term was seen by many as a welcome break from Jammeh's brutal rule, though the global health crisis hampered progress for an economy dependent on tourism as well as fish and peanut exports. Nevertheless, and despite living in exile, Jammeh had tried to influence the poll. In telephone speeches relayed at campaign rallies, Jammeh had tried to persuade his supporters to back an opposition coalition, but he appears to have failed to dent Barrow's following. The president received around 53% of the vote, according to the Electoral Commission, far outstripping his nearest rival. 3 opposition candidates have said they do not accept the results because of problems at polling stations, though they have not provided specifics or evidence of wrongdoing.
That was Natalie Powell of Reuters reporting. Pope Francis is condemning the exploitation of refugees for political propaganda as he paid his second visit on Sunday to the Greek island of Lesbos, a main entry point for migrants that has become a symbol of the plight of refugees. Some migrants there say the pontiff's visit brought some happiness to the area. Matthew La Rotonda has more.
The Pope coming today, it's something that it's giving all the refugees. It's making all the refugees to be happy because they know that the main time we are here, but there is someone who think about us, and he came to visit us, and not only like hearing it from far.
You were listening to Joshua, 18 years old, from the Congo, explaining his joy that Pope Francis was visiting the Greek island of Lesbos on Sunday, a troubled island on the front line of Europe's migrant crisis, and where Joshua has been living for a year in a refugee camp. This is Pope Francis's second visit to the island of Lesbos, one of the main landing areas for years for migrants trying to cross the treacherous sea into Europe, many dying in the process from countries like Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and parts of Africa. It's also been a major burden for the local residents.
Occhi che hanno visto violenza e povertà.
The Pope here is saying their eyes have seen violence and poverty, eyes streaked by too many tears, and later that little has changed since his last visit 5 years ago.
Perché non si parla di questo?
Governments and citizens need to attack the root causes that drive people from their homelands, Pope Francis says, not the people who suffer for it.
Venendo pure usate per propaganda politica.
Landrid, 42 years old and from Cameroon, hoped to meet the Pope.
It was a dream. My really message was just to ask him to try to find a way with Greek government, also with the European Union government, to make the asylum process be more flexible.
Pope Francis said he was distressed by calls from some EU leaders to build more walls.
Matthew Larotonda of Reuters filed that report. The tale of two South Sudanese brothers recently rescued in the Mediterranean Sea is a common one among the many African migrants seeking a better life in Europe. The two launched from Libya on a flimsy boat, but the engine broke down in the middle of the ocean, and they were eventually picked up by the Ocean Viking rescue ship. Reporter Ruth Elmendorf was on board the ship and has their story.
Bol Mayen, alias Colombe, and his brother Gad-Quoth were posting regularly on Facebook while living in Libya. But the two South Sudanese brothers suddenly stopped posting at the end of October. And that's because they were at sea, rescued on November 2nd by the Ocean Viking, after the engine on their flimsy boat broke down in the middle of the Mediterranean.
When I was in little ship, I think about I'm going to die now. I think that I'm dying. There's nothing else could help me.
The two left South Sudan in 2015 with friends and made their way to Libya, where they found work. But life was hard in a war-torn country, so they decided to leave for Europe, says Gad-Quoth Mayen and his friend George.
Libya is too much for me. Why? Yeah, they arrest me and they beat me, and when I go to work, maybe they cannot pay me. Yeah.
Maybe you have money, the robbers, they come and take your money. Maybe they kill you. That is why I decided to go to Europe.
On board the rescue vessel, the brothers passed the time playing cards and chatting with fellow migrants. Then an announcement comes they are going to Italy.
I'm feeling too much happy. I'm feeling in love. I'm so happy.
With this promising outlook, the time comes to think about the future in Europe.
In Europe, I have to find my talent. I play basketball, and also I'm an engineer. My dream, I want to play with a basketball. But if not, maybe I will continue for my education if there is no chance to play with basketball.
Walking the gangway to shore in Augusta, Sicily, a new life with its own challenges and dreams awaits them. Ruth Elmendorf for VOA News in Sicily.
Nigeria on Monday criticized Britain's decision to add the country to a travel red list due to coronavirus concerns as unjust and not driven by science. Nigeria joined South Africa and 9 other Southern African countries on the list on Monday after the British Health Ministry said most of its cases of the new Omicron variant had clear links to overseas travel from Nigeria and South Africa. The addition means only British citizens and residents traveling from Nigeria are allowed entry to Britain, and they must quarantine for 10 days in a hotel upon arrival. Nearly 2 years after the coronavirus was first reported in China, a new variant discovered by scientists in South Africa has led to a fresh round of travel restrictions affecting millions of people worldwide. VOA's Saqib Al-Islam reports on the hurdles travelers are again facing and the controversy over the new restrictions.
American Portia Steele was halfway to Kruger National Park outside Johannesburg when she heard about new U.S. travel restrictions targeting South Africa, where the Omicron variant of the coronavirus was first detected.
I was getting text messages from my friends and family about how they were restricting travel in the UK, expecting maybe that they would restrict travel back to the US.
Steele shortened her first ever trip to South Africa from 10 to only 2 days and booked 4 different flights back to United States before the restrictions took hold.
A lot of U.S. citizens tearful at the United counter, at the Delta counter, at the KLM counter, trying to figure out ways to get home.
Steele was required to have a vaccination card, a negative COVID test, and a negative rapid test at the airport to board a flight from Johannesburg. In the U.S., she was greeted by officials with the Center for Disease Control, given a self-testing kit, and then went into self-quarantine.
Traveling during the COVID era is knowing that things can change at any given moment, and that people have to be malleable. Yeah, just caution to anybody, just be flexible because you never know what's going to happen if you're abroad.
But nearly 2 years into the pandemic, some are questioning if the sudden travel restrictions are effective.
I think the travel restrictions really are not helping us at all and are probably counterproductive.
Dr. Patrick Jackson is an infectious disease researcher at University of Virginia. He says it's almost certain that world will see more coronavirus variants in areas with low vaccination rates like South Africa. He's calling on countries to focus more on getting people vaccinated than on restricting travel.
One of the major failures of our pandemic policy so far has been not giving vaccines to the developing world and ensuring that the global population can get vaccinated.
Dr. Anthony Fauci is the country's leading infectious disease expert and president's chief medical advisor. After the first U.S. Omicron case was detected days ago, Fauci renewed calls for people to get vaccinated and defended the new White House travel restrictions.
No one feels, I certainly don't, that a travel ban is going to prevent people who are infected from coming to the United States. But we needed to buy some time to be able to prepare, understand what's going on, what is the nature of this infection, what is the nature of the transmissibility.
More than 30 countries have closed their borders and more have imposed stricter measures in response to Omicron. As researchers try to learn more about this latest variant, officials say it's imperative that more people around the world get vaccinated. Saqibul Islam, VOA News, Washington.
At least 38 countries are reporting cases of the new Omicron variant of the coronavirus. U.S. President Joe Biden is calling the variant a cause for concern, but not panic, as scientists work to determine whether it is more dangerous than other strains. However, precautionary measures are threatening the global recovery from the pandemic, as South Africa cries foul at new travel restrictions. VOA's Arash Sharbasadi explains.
Christmas in quarantine. That might sum up the holiday season for would-be arrivals from southern African nations to London's Heathrow Airport. This after reports of room shortages in so-called quarantine hotels, as the United Kingdom now requires mandatory isolation upon arrival from southern Africa due to the Omicron variant of the coronavirus.
This turbulence of the booking and the flight changing and then arranging, finding out where you get your PCR tests and driving, 10 miles to go and book it. It takes its toll. You force people to do something, but allow them to do it.
The UK recently mandated a 14-day quarantine for travelers coming from what it considers red list or high-risk countries like some in southern Africa. The U.S. has restricted travel from several southern African nations as well.
When those were put in, the only cases we knew about were in southern Africa. And really those restrictions were put in to prevent new variants from coming to the United States and to protect the American people from new variants.
At a recent news conference in Ivory Coast, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa called travel bans unscientific and said they were a slap in the face to the African scientists who first detected the Omicron variant.
Whilst we respect the right of every country to take measures to protect their people, the sustained global cooperation we need to overcome the pandemic necessitates that we are led by science and not by emotion and not by political considerations.
As South Africa battles its fourth wave of COVID-19, largely driven by the Omicron variant, CDC Director Rochelle Walensky justified the agency's cautious approach.
We know it has many mutations, more mutations than prior variants, and many of those mutations have been associated with more transmissible variants, with evasion of some of our therapeutics, and potentially evasion of some of our immunity, and that's what we're watching really carefully.
As of Saturday, at least 16 U.S. states reported cases of the Omicron variant. As scientists continue research on Omicron, health officials brace for the spread of what they've called a highly mutated variant. Arash Arabasadi, VOA News.
We would like to hear what you think about Africa 54. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, Somalia's first film screening after 3 decades. We'll have a preview. But first, Hedy Adams tells us what's coming up on Wednesday's Straight Talk Africa. We'll be right back.
Be sure to join me for the next Straight Talk Africa. We'll talk about the Nobel Prizes. Africa has had many illustrious and some controversial Nobel laureates. There was jubilation when Tanzanian-born novelist Abdulrazak Gurnah won the 2021 Nobel Prize in Literature. But how relevant are these awards to Africans? And are these institutions in step with the times? We'll also discuss whether it's time Africa had a Nobel-style awards of its own. Join me, Hedy Adams, on the next Straight Talk Africa.
Welcome back to Africa 54. On December 9th and 10th, U.S. President Joe Biden will host a virtual summit for democracy, which will bring together world leaders, civil society, and the private sector to counter authoritarianism, fight corruption, and promote respect for human rights. The summit comes amid democratic backsliding in many parts of the world and questions of America's own democratic standing. VOA White House Bureau Chief Patsy Widakuswara has this preview.
A military takeover in Myanmar, an attack on Brazil's election system by its own president, the assassination of the Haitian president, and several coups on the African continent. These are just some of the democratic declines the world has witnessed in 2021, the backdrop of an upcoming virtual gathering hosted by U.S. President Joe Biden on December 9th and 10th, called the Summit for Democracy.
This is an opportunity for leaders to discuss the challenges and opportunities facing democratic governments and how democracies can deliver for their citizens based on the summit pillars of strengthening democracy, defending against authoritarianism, fighting corruption, and promoting respect for human rights.
The summit is part of Biden's campaign pledge to strengthen democracy around the world and will be attended by 110 countries.
The mobilization and the awareness raising and the focusing of the collective mind on these important democracy issues has already been a very salutary step taken by the administration.
Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin are not invited. While the summit is not explicitly about rallying the world against Russia or China, it is an opportunity for Biden to mobilize support against what he sees as their increasing authoritarian influence.
Bringing together democracies is in many ways a strategy that's designed to draw a line between the United States and its allies and Russia and China, and really to try to call on those states to choose a little bit. And not surprisingly, it makes them uncomfortable. States like South Korea, states like Germany, they really do depend on China for their economic prosperity.
Chinese Vice Foreign Minister Lei Yuchong said the summit will hurt global solidarity.
It divides countries into different levels of hierarchy, labels them as democratic or undemocratic, and point fingers at other countries' democratic systems.
During the summit, leaders will be encouraged to announce various commitments to strengthen democracy, but it's unclear whether these will turn into action. Still, the signaling of American democratic values is significant.
It shows a pretty significant break from the Trump administration, so that's important. And I think the kind of subsequent year of action that the Biden administration has announced will be really a proof of concept.
Some have also questioned whether the U.S. has moral standing to host the summit following the January 6th siege of the Capitol by supporters of Donald Trump seeking to overturn the former president's electoral defeat. The Biden administration says it is precisely the ability to acknowledge imperfections and confront them transparently, a strength unique to democracies, that the summit is meant to showcase. Patsy Kuswara, VOA News at the White House.
The new 90-minute film, Ayanle, due for release in February, will be the first film screening for 3 decades in Somalia's war-ravaged capital, Mogadishu. Olivia Chan reports.
This is the new film, Ayanle. The story is set in Nairobi's suburb of Eastleigh, home to many Somali families, and follows a Somali actor dreaming of a breakthrough in Hollywood, but who is frustrated that he's only ever cast as a pirate or terrorist. He ends up impersonating a member of Somalia's Al-Qaeda-linked Al-Shabaab insurgency to scam $500 from a gullible Western journalist. After the scam TV interview, he becomes entangled with a police elite anti-terrorism unit. The new 90-minute movie is due for release in February, and it will be the first film screening for 3 decades in Somalia's war-ravaged capital, Mogadishu. Somali-Dutch director Amer Farah wrote the movie based on scams he saw while working as a news cameraman for international TV networks.
I came across a lot of interesting stories. Stories that you hear when the camera is off. And for those years, I used to collect those stories, and some of them were even better than fiction. And those stories happen different places in Africa. And I wanted to tell a story that people, especially from same background, same region, can identify with. So I had to find, how to put that all together and make a movie out of it.
It took Farah 8 years to write, finance, and shoot the movie. And the Eastleigh community rallied around the film by donating refreshments or homes to use as sets. The police helped by offering cars and let Farah into the local jail as a replica set. US Somali actor Bahad Abdirahman, who acted in Hollywood movie Captain Phillips and starred in Kenya's Oscar-winning short film Watu Wati, plays Ayanle. He says most of the crew and actors had experienced the kind of police harassment shown by the film, and many were nervous about publicly acting like terrorists, especially when police were around.
We kind of had the situation, and when we were filming in Eastleigh, there were a scene where we were portraying as Al-Shabaab members, and some of the cops was taking photos, and the cast were very uneasy, and I can sense it. So I asked them what's going on, and they were like, if those cops took our pictures and later when this film is done, they'll come and interrogate us and put us in jail, whatever, the same situation the main character Ayanle went through.
For Farah, the most exciting thing about the movie is the blossoming of Somali cinema and the chance to show more than pirates, refugees, militants, and war.
Olivia Chan of Reuters reporting. It has been 4 years since then Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi declared the military defeat of the Islamic State group in Iraq. More than a year later, in March 2019, the capture of Baghouz in Syria marked the group's total territorial defeat. VOA Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb explains the significance of the terror group's vanquishing and where it stands now.
Islamic State in Iraq and Syria once controlled more than 7 million people and 100,000 kilometers of land. Since its territorial defeat, it could no longer wage a full-scale war, but the group, also known as ISIS, has not stopped terrorizing local populations through bombings and small attacks.
ISIS as an insurgency and terrorist organization has not been defeated. They are geared to wage a long war, a long jihad.
Tom Jocelyn of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies says there is also evidence of Islamic State in Iraq and Syria commanding more active ISIS affiliates in areas of Africa and in Afghanistan, where the United Nations now says the group has spread to every province within the war-torn country.
I think that overall the U.S. has pretty consistently underestimated the jihadi cause. The U.S. has, for a very long time, has played what I call disconnect the dots. The political and military leadership and others really have not wanted to be in this fight for a long time. And so they see the enemy the way they want to see it.
Former President Barack Obama once infamously called Islamic State in Iraq and Syria the, quote, JV or junior varsity team, only to later send thousands of troops to help counter them. And former President Donald Trump twice tried to pull all forces out of Syria, only to send troops back in to continue helping Syrian allies battling the terror group. The international coalition's role fighting Islamic State in Iraq and Syria has shrunk over time, as have U.S. troop numbers.
Today, that mission has been scaled down a lot. The number of U.S. troops has been reduced by over 66% in the past 24 months.
The roughly 2,500 troops in Iraq are sharing intelligence and helping the Iraqi forces and the Kurdish forces known as the Peshmerga with operational planning. About 1,000 U.S. troops in Syria are helping the Syrian Democratic Forces find remnants of Islamic State while securing critical infrastructure. Colonel Miles Kaggans, a military fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations who served as the spokesman for the global coalition to defeat ISIS, says where U.S. forces are partnered in Syria, the terror group is unable to hold territory or conduct significant attacks.
In contrast, in regime-held areas, there are still pockets of resistance and terrorist activity from ISIS that is giving fits to the Syrian regime in the Badia Desert. So this is a sign that our continued presence, our continued partnership at a very small scale, we're talking just several hundred troops, is paying off dividends globally.
One of the most worrisome problems lingering since Islamic State's territorial defeat is the massive number of fighters and family members detained in overcrowded prison camps.
ISIS is now a so-called caliphate that's in a cage. More than 10,000 ISIS fighters, members, are locked up and held by Syrian Democratic Forces in North and East Syria.
With detainees in Syria hailing from more than 60 different nations, local Syrian fighters are looking to Iraq and the global community to take in some of them before the camps become an even bigger breeding ground for the next generation of insurgents. Carla Babb, VOA News, The Pentagon.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From the Africa 54 team here in Washington, we thank you for watching.